Even though I'm technically a 90s kid being born in 96, yeah, I know, I'm old. My peak Nickelodeon watching era was definitely the 2000s. In my last video, I covered the shows from the 90s that I grew up on, but now we're getting into the real deal here. I'm going to be taking a look back on all the Nick shows from 2000 to 2010 that I grew up on. I watched so much Nick as a kid and have quite a few shows to cover from this era, so let's get into it. And if I'm missing any shows that you loved, I probably just didn't watch them when I was younger, but let me know if I missed one of your favorites and where you would put it. Starting off with the animated stuff and going in release order, first up we've got As Told by Ginger. I watched this show quite a bit as a kid, but I think it's one of the more forgettable shows that they have to offer. But it shouldn't be. This show is genuinely good. And I think the biggest reason I don't remember it as fondly as some of the other shows is I was probably just a little too young for it at the time. For being a Nickelodeon cartoon, this show had some mature topics as well as having like complex characters who weren't just caricatures of kids, but felt like actual people with flaws and personalities. This show feels raw and unpolished in a way that a lot of other kids shows at the time really weren't. But it also was really ahead of its time, not only in the characters and the stories, but in the little things as well, like having the outfits change from episode to episode and the continuity that they were really consistent with. It's very much a coming of age type show, but while I wasn't the target demographic here, I can respect it. I think this show has more in common with shows like Freaks and Geeks than Spongebob, which is probably why it always felt a little out of place to me. But it is a genuinely good show, just not one that I personally loved. So I'd probably throw it on B. Fairly Odd Parents. Okay, I know there's been like 2 reboots, countless live action movies, and it should have just been able to rest in peace by now as a franchise. But that original run of Fairly Odd Parents, so damn good. This is hands down one of the funniest shows Nick ever had. The premise of Timmy having fairies who grant his wishes is just such a great concept to lead into countless funny situations, but the writing and the humor of the show is just top notch. The characters are great, even if Cosmo gets a little flanderized after the first couple of seasons, but even all the side characters from Crocker to Jorgen are just so memorable and funny. Yeah, it kind of falls off after Poof is born, or at least that's when I kind of fell off from it. So I'm not really talking about the seasons with Timmy's neighbor or I think like a dog fairy. I don't know, but I don't care. The original run of this show with just Timmy, Cosmo, and Wanda is so good that alone puts this in S tier for me. But Ugly Martians. Well, they weren't kidding. I know it's in the name, but dear God, those are certainly some butt ugly Martians. I liked this show as a kid. Like, I watched it all the time. I had the toys from Burger King, and I might have a DVD of some of the episodes that I bought for like 50 cents a couple years ago. But I could not tell you why I liked this as a kid or why my parents put up with it. This show is such a hard watch as an adult. The concept is pretty simple. A group of aliens come to Earth, try to take it over, but they like it so much they decide to stay. You know, that's fine. It works. Nothing else in the show does, though. The animation is god-awful. I know it's early 2000s CGI, but Jesus. The characters are so dumb, it's like they couldn't decide if they wanted them to be the Ninja Turtles or Ren and Stimpy. None of the characters are likable, the backgrounds and colors look like a PS1 game but more boring, and the plots to every episode are just razor thin. This show sucks, but I'm keeping my DVD of it. D tier. Also, if my voice sounds a little different, I'm just getting over being sick, but I still want to make the video, so here we are. Invader Zim. So this is the second show in a row about aliens trying to take over Earth, but this show makes butt ugly Martians look like butt ugly Martians. This has got to be one of the coolest looking shows Nick ever did. The animation alone is so unique and interesting to watch, and the whole show just has like a sort of steampunk vibe to it, which really sets it apart from the other shows. And it's pretty damn funny too. Not just the ridiculous lines from Zim and Gur, but the situations they find themselves in are usually pretty hilarious too. That being said, I do think the show can be a little obnoxious at times, and the episodes are usually pretty similar feeling, but the show has its own unique voice, even if it's a really loud one. This isn't one of my favorites on the list, but I can definitely see why it might be someone else's. I'm gonna say A tier. Chalk Zone. I watched the absolute hell out of this show as a kid. This was definitely one of my favorites at the time. It was just such a fun concept with Rudy, the main character, getting magic chalk that he can use to go to the Chalk Zone and basically play God. But that being said, they really only went so far with it. Like, a lot of the episodes feel really similar to one another, and looking back on it now, it's a little boring at times. The characters are fun for the most part. They're a little two-dimensional at times, you know, except for Snap. I will accept no Snap slander on my channel. But even though I loved it as a kid, I can see the flaws in it for sure. But you know what isn't a flaw? The theme song. Outside of that though, this show's pretty just okay. Great concept, not executed super well, but not really bad by any means either. I'd say B tier. Jimmy Neutron. One of the few shows that I think got better the longer it went on. I love the movie, went and saw it in theaters, and I remember the show premiering after the Kids' Choice Awards, and I was like, alright, this is a fun show. But the more I watched it, the more I loved it. Having a kid genius isn't like a super original concept, but the characters, the plots, and the humor all just really elevated this one. The plot tends to revolve around Jimmy inventing stuff, usually to solve a problem caused by another invention, so it can feel a little repetitive at times, but the humor and fun in the episodes is just enough that I don't care. And even though the show was mostly self-contained episodes, there was still some continuity throughout the seasons, which is always nice to see in these kinds of shows. That's not even mentioning the special episodes, like the one when Jimmy helps out a James Bond type secret agent. Don't even get me started on the masterpiece that is the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. And while Jimmy is the titular character, he's not even the best character on the show. We got Sheen, we got Carl Weezer, we got Hugh Neutron, and of course the absolute king, Bulby. There's so many memorable episodes in this show, like the Battle of the Bands, the superhero one, the Night of the Living Pizza. This show just has a special place in my heart. And while it might not be at the top of your list, I'm gonna say it's near the top of mine. I'm gonna throw it on S tier. All Grown Up. Making a sequel show to one of your most successful programs is probably a pretty daunting task, but I think they pulled this off basically as well as they could. I love the Rugrats. I even put it in S tier on my last video. And as a kid when this was airing, I was so excited. I remember when the first episode came out that was basically just like a special episode of Rugrats. I even recorded it on a blank VHS tape so I could watch it over and over as a kid. I am old. I actually really like this show. I think it did a good job of portraying the characters as older kids. You know, they felt like the same characters you were used to watching, just a little bit more depth to them because, well, they grew up. And as someone who grew up on Rugrats but was getting older when this came out, I was like the perfect demographic for the show. The animation is less zany, the characters and storylines are more mature, but it never feels like it takes the original show for granted. I think as a spin-off, this was pretty solid, so I'm gonna put it on A tier. My Life as a Teenage Robot. Man, this show deserves more recognition. It's got such a fun premise. A mad scientist making a weaponized robot who resembles a teenage girl who then decides she wants to go to school and try to live like a human. I remember really enjoying this one as a kid. It had almost like a Kim Possible vibe where the main character tried to balance normal life with saving the world. So it was pretty action-packed while also being sort of a coming-of-age story. And even though there was quite a bit of action, it still somehow felt like a pretty chill show most of the time, with a really relaxed tone and pacing to it. The animation is really cool, having a retro futuristic style, along with art styles similar to like Powerpuff Girls or Dexter's Lab, so it feels familiar in a way, even if it's your first time seeing it. The characters are all fun and likable, and the writing can be pretty clever at times too. I think I'm gonna throw this one on A. Angela Anaconda. You ever have those shows from your childhood that you look back on and you're like, was that real or was that a fever dream I had as a kid? This is one of those shows for me. If you brought this show up to someone my age, they might not know what you're talking about, but if you show them a picture from the show, I'm sure they'd be like, oh yeah, that thing. Well, as a whole, it's not super memorable. The art style they used is probably sitting in the back of every millennial's mind just waiting to be unlocked. It was such a bold choice to make an entire show like this, almost like early South Park where everything's just made up of cutouts. But even though it was a strong choice, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it is memorable, for better or worse. And honestly, that's the most memorable part of the show. The characters are alright, the show can be decently funny, but outside of the actual designs, nothing really sticks out about this one too much to me. Didn't hate it, didn't really like it. The show gets a lot of hate online, and like, I get it. I don't enjoy it, but I don't dislike it enough to be like, this is the worst thing Nick ever made. Because trust me, we're getting there. You know, I do remember there was like a short from this show in the beginning of the Digimon movie too, so it gets some nostalgia points for me for that. Let's say C tier. Danny Phantom. This was definitely one of my favorites as a kid. Such a fun show, just full of action, fun characters, great humor. This was the first follow-up to Fairly Odd Parents from Butch Hartman, and I love that even though the animation style is similar, it has such a different vibe to it. A lot more action-packed, a bit more mature, while still having that fun animation and humor. And even though it's got sort of a villain of the week outline to the show, the ghost villains were always super fun to watch Danny defeat, and the overarching plot of him trying to keep his ghost power secret from his parents was a lot of fun too. The fact that you get actual character development with almost every character in the show is kind of astounding. And even though it can be a bit comical at times, the action scenes in the show are pretty well done and work really well in this art style. I love this show. I think it's a blast. S tier. Speaking of S tier, if you're subscribed to this channel, you're S tier in my book. Well, except for one of you, you know who you are, but I'm not gonna tell. Avatar: The Last Airbender. What can I say about Avatar that hasn't been said before? An absolutely beautiful show that somehow manages to not only be poignant and thoughtful, but hilarious and action-packed. This has got to be some of the best animation Nick has ever put out. There are scenes that are just absolutely breathtaking, and the fight scenes are so smooth and entertaining. And this show also has one of the most in-depth storylines on the channel as well. The lore you get from this show is levels above anything else Nick has ever done, and it really keeps you engaged and wanting to see what happens next. All of the characters are so well done, and Zuko, the main antagonist for the first couple of seasons, is one of my favorite antagonists in any show. This show can range from fun, silly episodes to some of the darkest stories that the channel has ever aired. This is not only what I'd consider to be probably the best show to air on Nickelodeon, but one of the best animated shows out there. S tier, without a single doubt. Cat Scratch. This is a case of I only watched it when there was nothing else on, but even though it's not a show I ever really looked forward to, I wasn't ever too upset about watching it either. It follows a group of 3 cats whose owner passes away and they inherit all of their wealth and the mansion and even the butler. It's zany, it's funny, a little obnoxious but not overly, and the cast does some really good voice work. I didn't love it, but it was alright in my book. I'd say a solid B. The X's. I actually think it's kind of a shame that this show only lasted 1 season. It's a show centered on a family of spies trying to navigate being secret agents and a normal family, and while it's not a super unique storyline, it can definitely give way to plenty of fun stories. And while the animation is also pretty unique, it does feel a little flat at times, even though it's definitely colorful. The characters are pretty fun to watch, and I think with a few more seasons probably could have been fleshed out a bit more and became characters that we'd actually care about as an audience. But even with the short amount of time that we do spend with them, and with the help of some great voice work, they're still pretty fun and interesting. While this show is definitely not like peak Nickelodeon or anything, I think it was decent and a fun watch as a kid. I'd say B for this one. My Dad the Rockstar. Created by Gene Simmons of the band Kiss and based on his own experiences with his son, this show centers around a normal kid trying to live a normal life while his dad's one of the biggest rock stars in the world. Honestly, a pretty good premise for a show, but I think the show turned out kind of boring and forgettable. I didn't mind it as a kid, like I'd watch it every now and then, but I'd totally forgotten about it before writing this list. The show doesn't do anything wrong per se, like the characters are fine, the animation isn't hard to look at or anything, and it has a decent plot, but it all just kind of comes together to pretty underwhelming results. I think this show's about as C tier as it gets. Kappa Mikey. So this technically was a Nicktoons show since it aired on that channel instead of the regular Nick channel, but I don't care, it counts. A show all about parodying not only American cartoons, but Japanese anime as well. It revolves around an American actor who travels to Japan to star in a Japanese TV show. And the blending of the two styles itself is so funny, but all the jabs it makes at both types of animated shows is just so much fun to watch. This show is honestly pretty hilarious at times, especially if you're an anime fan. You're bound to find tons of little jokes and Easter eggs in basically every episode. And while almost every character is made up of nothing but cliches, they're still pretty fun and endearing to watch. And while the animation does leave a bit to be desired, it still works pretty well in the context of the show. This one's a lot of fun. I'd say B tier. El Tigre. I think this is one of the most underrated shows on this list. The concept of having a kid who has a secret identity has been done plenty of times, but I really like the twist here that Manny's dad is a hero while his grandfather's a villain, and he has to choose between which path he's going to take. And while he usually chooses to do the right thing, he still has his mischievous moments throughout the show because, I mean, being bad's more fun. For being a Flash animated cartoon, this show looks great. The colors really pop and it has an aesthetic that it really stays to, and that sets it apart from a lot of the other shows here. It doesn't try to shy away from the fact that this is a show by Hispanic people taking place in a world filled with Hispanic culture. This show can be clever and witty at times, but also completely wacky and off the rails. I do think it might have benefited from showing a bit more action here and there since it's about a boy who's a superhero. But all in all, I think the show was a lot of fun and deserved a longer life. I'd say A tier. Back at the Barnyard. Barnyard the movie? Not that bad. Barnyard the show? Not that good. Kind of evens out when you think about it. I thought the movie that came out before this was pretty fun and had really memorable moments in it. The show, on the other hand, entirely forgettable. It's got the same characters for the most part, albeit some different voice actors, but where the movie has some real heart to it and some really clever jokes, this show just kind of felt dumb and shallow, especially in comparison. It's not bad really, but it's not one that I'd call good either. Also, why do the male cows have udders? Tell me, Nickelodeon! I'm gonna say C tier. The Mighty Bee. You'd think a show with a great cast of comedians including Amy Poehler and Andy Richter would have been amazing. You'd be wrong. This show follows a Girl Scout named Bessie who's trying to get all of her Scout badges. Pretty simple premise that could lead to a bunch of fun ideas. But the show just kind of always felt kind of meh. It's not overly obnoxious, the animation's fine, the voice acting's probably the best part, but I always found this show pretty boring overall. And I don't know, maybe it just wasn't my cup of tea, but I'm gonna put this on C tier. Fanboy and Chum Chum. Let me say, I don't know if this is the worst thing Nickelodeon's put out, But if not, it's a close second. When this show first aired, I tried watching it. I think I gave this a fair shot. You know, I like silly stuff and it looked silly. But it was more than that too. This show is just straight up dumb. Not in like a fun way. Like, I like plenty of shows that are dumb and silly, like Ed, Edd n Eddy or Spongebob, but they're dumb in like a fun, clever way, and this show is just stupid. I can't think of a single redeeming quality to the show. The animation is bad, the characters are annoying, the plots are stupid, even the theme song is probably the most annoying theme of any of these shows. This is straight up D tier, no doubt. And that's gonna do it for the animated shows of this era, so let's move on to the live action, starting with an all-time classic, Drake and Josh. What an absolute monster of a show. Outside of SpongeBob, this show undoubtedly had the most influence on my life as a kid. I still can't say South America the right way.
It says here they're only available in South America.
Even though the plots can be pretty hit or miss, the writing with the humor and the characters here is just peak Nickelodeon to me. There are so many jokes and moments that are just brilliant and still hilarious to this day. So many memorable scenes, and every single character in the show has moments where they shine. Not even just the two brothers, but the rest of the family, especially Megan. By the way, sorry to anyone with that name around the time that this was airing, because I guarantee you had people saying your name like this.
Megan! 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 Megan!
But you've got Crazy Steve, Helen, the two nerds. Hell, even the parents had great moments here and there. But the two leads, Drake and Josh, had such great chemistry, and they're just absolutely hilarious throughout the whole show. Seriously, just what a show. S tier. Neds Declassified. I love this show as a kid. It came out like right around the time I was starting middle school, so I was the core audience for it. I always hoped that my middle school days would be as wacky and fun-filled as this. They weren't. But that doesn't make me love it any less. This show had so many genuinely funny moments and memorable characters. Sure, it could be a bit corny and low budget feeling at times, but I didn't care. This show was a blast and I loved it. It was so wacky and silly while also giving out some genuinely good tips here and there for kids. Also, the fact that we never got a revival is a mistake. Where's that adult survival guide, Ned? I need it. S tier. Unfabulous. So this was a show that I was never like the target audience for, but my older sister was, so I had to watch it quite a bit as a kid. But I wasn't ever like, oh god, don't turn that on. But I was never really like too excited about it either. I don't remember it super fondly, but it did introduce Emma Roberts to the world, who is without a doubt the biggest star to come out of any Nick show. I don't really feel too much about this show one way or the other, so I'm gonna say C tier. Zoey 101. So this one is kind of in the same boat where I only watched it when my sister did. But this one also ended up sucking me in as a kid, and I became a fan of it. Man, that school was so sweet, and I wanted to go to a boarding school like that so badly. I wouldn't say this was like a great show, but it for sure had some fun moments and characters. It's funny and entertaining, the acting is fine for the most part, and as a kid, I was fully engulfed in the whole will they, won't they storyline with Chase and Zoey. I'd probably throw this one on B. Mr. Meaty. Alright, is this show gross? Yes. Has it haunted my nightmares since I was a kid? Yes. Does it have its funny moments? Also yes. Does that make up for this absolute abomination? No. I can see where this show might have its fans, but dear God, I am not one of them. This is probably the hardest thing to watch when it comes to Nickelodeon. I like Muppets. I like surreal humor. I like horror movies even. Throw all that in a bun and you get a Mr. Meaty sandwich, and I will not be taking a bite. What an absolute horrifying show. But also, I guess if you're into that sort of thing, I'm not gonna knock you for it. But I think this is the worst thing ever made by Nickelodeon. I would rather watch a Fanboy and Chum Chum marathon over one episode of this. D tier, no questions asked. The Naked Brothers Band. Let me start by saying this is not a good show, but the songs, absolute bangers. Crazy Car, banger. I Don't Want to Go to School, banger. Banana Smoothie, guess what? Banger. I was obsessed with this show and the songs as a kid, watching every new episode when it came out and listening to the songs on repeat on my MP3 player. I'm old! I wanted to be a part of this band, more than anything, and this show was probably the reason why I started so many bands in middle school. They didn't work out, in case you were wondering. The show itself, pretty badly acted. Shot like a documentary, pretty boring and predictable. But I don't care. I love this show and I will stick up for it. And someday when there's a Naked Brothers Band reunion tour, I will see you in the pit during Crazy Car. And I'll be carrying my copy of the movie and season 1 on DVD, and I'll get them signed. Also, it's kind of crazy that the younger brother Alex also became one of the most successful actors from Nickelodeon, going on to be in stuff like the Jumanji movies, Hereditary, and even the new Childish Gambino music video, playing the drums nonetheless. Anyways, I'm putting this on B tier and you can't stop me. iCarly. So this show made sense when it was first announced. Miranda Cosgrove was a big breakout star when it came to Drake and Josh and School of Rock. You know, she really stole the show in both of those, so it made sense to give her her own show. But what didn't make sense was how great it was. Sure, the premise was a little iffy, revolving around the main character and her friends basically starting a web show, but damn, the comedy in this show was top notch. This show is just absolutely hilarious. Every single episode has bits or jokes that make me laugh. So many great characters, not even including the main cast of like Carly, Sam, Freddie, and Spencer, who are all great in their own ways. But I mean, this show gave us Gibby. Nothing else needs to be said. It's Gibby. You can tell that this took a lot of inspiration from his predecessor, Drake and Josh, because while the storylines would fall a little flat here and there, the clever yet silly humor throughout the show really elevated it. And honestly, even though I didn't love it as much as the original, I think this is one of the few shows that did a revival pretty well. Solid A tier. Big Time Rush, the final show on our list. So growing up, I was really into pop music. I loved the Backstreet Boys, Aaron Carter, NSYNC. But by the time the show about a boy band came around, I was already into my edgy phase, listening to stuff like Hollywood Undead and 3 Days Grace. So even though I wasn't listening to any of the songs from the show, I'd still catch it every now and then, and I enjoyed it for the most part. The characters were funny, they'd always be getting into hijinks and crazy situations, and even though it wasn't the type of music I was listening to, basically any show about music was fine by me. I don't have a super fond memory of the show, like I wasn't gonna buy tickets when they did that reunion tour a couple years back, but I still enjoyed it and I watched it when it was on. Also, Gustavo is a fashion icon. Let's say B tier. And there you have it, folks. My ranking of all the shows on Nick from the 2000s. If I'm missing some, like I said, probably just didn't watch it. But let me know which of these shows were your favorites and where you'd rank them. And as always, let me know what you want me to rank next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.